We are in Conversation Day, and this panel will discuss how do we talk to our children at this time, this very tumultuous time, in a time of COVID and in a time of social injustice, social unrest, social issues. A lot is happening in the world. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Duke-Westfield, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting this panel this afternoon. And let me start by introducing our panelists. On my left is Mr. Floyd Solomon. Floyd is a husband, father, entrepreneur, speaker, and believer. And I'm particularly intrigued by the last one, believer. I'd love for us to have a conversation about that because you don't often hear of people affirming that they are believers in this time. So thank you very much for that. Next to him is Brent Barry. Brent, when I first read this, right, so it says, Brent is a son, father, professional, and sportsman. And I don't know if it's the speed reader in me. I read son, father, professional, sportsman. So I was going I was right.
I thought about it, yeah. But I'm definitely not a professional sportsman. Professional/sportsman. I sport for free.
Okay, yeah, like a lot of us. I'm a weekend warrior. More weekend than warrior, but... And the lady on the panel, apart from myself, is Miss Apphia Attzs. And Apphia is a social architect, youth worker, who focuses on invisible structures, interesting, healing through food, and I like that, because I like food and I like healing, and the development of sustainable lifestyles. And I guess, Apphia, I'd like to start with you because I found your short introduction quite interesting, particularly in light of what we're talking about. You said you have a 10-year-old son? 11-year-old son. So I guess, throwing the question out to you, how do you talk to him, given your professional and I guess your social and experiential background? How do you talk to him at this time and what do you say?
All right, so first thing, I am a person. I'm a person, and a lot of times I think we don't recognize parents. As a child worker, we don't really get recognized as parents. As a person, we get recognized by the role we have to perform in light of these persons that we are responsible for. Yes. So I have to always establish that I am a person, I have needs, I have moments as well. So it's a very honest kind of relationship I try to foster with my son and even the other children I work with. And it makes it easier for me a lot of times for them to see me at my best, my worst, all of it is really important for them to see that too, and even how I process my challenges, because they always mimic what they see.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether we are cognizant of it, whether we recognize it or not, whether they do it in front of us or not, it happens. I have a lot of my learning from my parents, and it's not just my parents, but everybody who would have
parented
me, which have been a myriad, a stream of people throughout my life.
How did you deal? Sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead. With COVID-19, there were some basic things that we were asked to do. So wash your hands, cleanliness, hygiene. And to some extent, that's some of the easy information. How did you deal with the fear factor? Because there's a big fear factor, at least I've found.
So I don't think we really impart too much fear in our household as a practice.
Right.
So even if I see it happening in different ways, I try to question it within myself, or my mom and I, my son lives with my mom and I. So I try to question what is the source of this thing that I'm feeling. I have to be very careful when I interact with him. So I want him to be well. Right. And a lot of times, children they are better than us. They are very resilient. They are very, very resilient. And we don't recognize that in them, that's their strength that we could draw on. Yeah. So a lot of times it's about me just, pull back a little bit. He is fine. He seems fine. He mightn't be doing everything exactly. Why is it that I need him to do everything exactly this way? And a lot of times it's because of how the system is set. the education system, you're fussing about SCA. He has to write SCA.
SCA,
So I don't know, you have a 10-year-old, right? So coming close to that time. So it's just about staying in touch with reality, but also not trying to control too much. So that fear thing, to get it to kind of be the background. Be at the background, not at the forefront of any learning that he has to do or our decision making.
So Brent, let me bring you in here, particularly because as a father of 4, your children are a bit older.
Yes.
So there may not be necessarily the kind of instructional conversation to be had in the household, but there's a philosophical discussion, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
That happens. How have you and your partner, have you all been managing through that? And I guess the rest of the family as well.
Yeah, well, I'm a single father of 4, right? So divorced. But, you know, I have liberal access to the kids, so they spend a lot of time with me, which is fantastic, you know. So I don't hold back. I tell them every simple thing.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't censor the music, you know, I don't censor what I watch.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
We know.
Right? But it's important that they take it in, but understand the context of under which, you know, things are happening. Right? And that is what I try to provide. I want them to understand a larger picture, right? And do some reading, you know, get some information. They're old enough now to start to seek information, because there's so much information
that is hitting them.
There's so much information, and you have to be careful, you know, and sometimes the media is not very responsible. You know? And they could head down a particular direction which is not necessarily accurate. So in terms of COVID, understand, one, by nature, my job, right, I cannot be a fearmonger, right? I have to be very cool, you know. I work in one of the upstream operators, right, in Trinidad. So in terms of crisis and emergency management, I was very much in the thick of our COVID response. So I can't be waging fear, right, on the family. So I think they get that sense of calm and that sense of, you know, understanding. Let us understand first, right, before we act. Understand this is a threat to people's safety, right? And only by your own discipline and responsibility that we're going to combat it. We're getting guidelines from the government. We're getting guidelines, you know, for us to stay indoors and maintain a social distance, wear a mask, you know. So it's just for them to understand that.
Floyd, in addition to COVID, we are also contending with the social change of the time. A lot of it driven out of the United States, and the incident involving George Floyd, but it has spiraled across the world. Have you had to have a conversation with your children that addresses that or puts it in context for Trinidad and Tobago? Because our situation is different. And I think that is important for us to establish with our children. So have you had to have that kind of conversation with them, and what have you said? And how have they reacted, I guess?
Interestingly enough, the day when I looked at the video of George Floyd's death, and normally I don't look at those videos because I find them to be too gruesome and sometimes insensitive to the family who would have lost that loved one. But I looked at it that day, and it probably was a good thing, because it hit me at the core. And I then asked my son, did you know about it? And he said, Dad, interestingly, that's what we discussed online today with our English teacher. He showed us a picture of Colin Kaepernick on one knee, taking the knee, and then of Derek, you know, the Caucasian cop, with his knee on George Floyd's neck. And the teacher asked him, how did they feel about it? Which I thought was a really potent question to ask. Because sometimes you could ask, well, what do you think of this?
What do you think, yes.
And it could be a very rational response, and they may try to respond in a way that may sound right to the teacher for a right answer. But when you ask somebody how they feel, it's like if I ask you, how are you feeling today? I could get a totally different response. And so my son's response was surprising to me, because I didn't realize how much he felt that those things didn't really affect him. Because he's thinking, look, that is the US, we're here, and we are not exposed to that. At least I haven't, from his point of view, I haven't heard of that incident happening here. You may hear of, you know, police using excessive force in some communities. You'd see some fires and protests from the residents of that area, but not to that point, or not to that extent.
Yeah.
And so for him, that very evening, my wife asked him to look at it, and we were totally fine with that. And when he saw the entire video, because he saw the photo, when he saw the video, the whole conversation changed, because he became much more somber, and he started to project himself into the situation, because he has aspirations of studying in the US. Right. So he's thinking, look, I'm a Trinidadian man, right? I'm of African descent, but I'm going there, and they're not going to say, look, are you American?
Yeah, they're not distinguishing. Yeah.
It's not Afro-American, Afro-Trinidadian. They're okay, hey, look, you're a black man. And if you end up on the wrong side of the law, if you get pulled over and you meet the wrong police officer, things could go left very quickly. Yes. So he started to have, I think that's when he started to have a personal experience with the situation, and I was happy for that, because they say we don't see the world as we are, as it is, sorry.
As it is.
We see it as we are. And I think that moment was a broadening of his perspective, because he got my take on it. He had his own take initially. And then the conversation just started to spread in our home, and he spoke to my sister and friends. And what I got was a son who I felt was much more sort of socially and even politically aware of the world around him, and that this could come to his doorstep at any time. And he could experience it here, but in more subtle ways. It may not be as overt as that. But you go dining here and you realize, look, I'm not parking in the same place as other people.
Else, yeah.
The chef doesn't come out and greet my table the way he greets that other table.
Not seated at
so you start to see very sort of subtle ways of where there's prejudice and where there's discrimination. And I was really happy that sort of triggered that response in him, and broadened his perspective, because I think that was one of the greatest things for life. I think in general, it's a matter of perspective, and that's where you have difference of opinions. Yeah. The lens you put on and stuff. Yeah. So
I think for me it was, my son is 18, I have one son, he's 18. And for me it was one of awareness for him.
Yes.
So the entire incident, and I guess because of my news background, my television is on all day.
All the time.
I watch CNN, I watch BBC.
What are your sources? what do you watch?
I watch everything. I watch CNN.
What is everything?
I watch CNN, I watch BBC, I watch, it's hard, but I sometimes do. I watch Al Jazeera, right. Okay. I watch National Geographic, I like to soak in information and news. And then I'm part of a group that I can't seem to get rid of, that we have those kinds of conversations as well. But for me, so I took my son all the way back to the 1970 Black Power riots that my parents took part in. I know the history, but of course I wasn't there. I was born that year, actually. So we had a conversation about that, because he had no concept of that. He's had no concept of July 27, 1990. So in terms of, I guess, suffering, oppression, marching or taking action, protest action for something that you believe in, his particular generation and his group of friends, I shouldn't go that broad, but his group of friends, they do not have an awareness of that. And I found that very interesting. Now, to some extent, I didn't want to necessarily burst the bubble entirely. Yes. Because I think that young people ought to live in the world that they are in, not necessarily the world that I don't want them to be like you. I want you to know of the world, but don't live in the past. Yeah. That has gone. Yeah. You are here now.
But Nicole, does he have context? Yeah. Right? Does he understand what the history is?
Yeah. I'll be honest, I think that understanding is coming.
Okay.
I don't know that he has it yet.
Right.
So he will ask questions. So for him, I found it very interesting. And I want to get your perspective on this. Blackout Tuesday, when everybody's social media went black, he turned to me and he said, but mommy, what's the point of that? It's not going to bring George Floyd back. And I said, yes, that is true. But people need to feel that they can respond to something that is hurting them. And this is a way of response. Yeah. I don't think he bought that at all. So we talked about it some more. But I think for him, and maybe it's because of his youth, he wanted to see an immediate response to deal with that situation. You know what I mean? And that I found very interesting in terms of how he... I guess even though your son is 10 and at that age, it may not, all of the triggers may not be there. What are you seeing, or what potentially are you seeing with other children that may be triggering for them a kind of feeling that they may not necessarily understand?
Because access to the children I work with has been very limited, I don't have much of a response to that part of the question specifically, but I kind of wanted to circle back to Brent just now.
Go right ahead.
Because he was talking about the context, and even Floyd, when you asked him about the relatedness to Trinidad and like our reality of being of color, and the fact that we often put aside the prejudices and how privilege plays out because of the circles that we're in. Sometimes we know it's easier to play the fence. So I really want to kind of talk to that issue, and I like where Brent was going with the context, because it's really important to develop some form of context so that they could relate to the past and they could find value in the past. So I come from a trade union background because of my mother. I cannot not say that, because a lot of my grounding and who I am stems from there. And it makes me feel very much a part of things that are long gone. Because I think it's very important for us to borrow some things from the past and not allow like things to be going on. We pretty much on fumes, right? Academia has changed. We had academics long time ago who would find it very important to write papers and put out positions and have conversations and have meetings, whether it's public or in private in their circles. And I think we need to rediscover that part of ourselves as Trinidadians, as Caribbean people, and reestablish those types of meaningful relationships with each other. And it doesn't have to be all academic, because the man on the ground has a lot of information and a lot of intelligence that we often don't pay attention to. We don't. And when you talk about invisible structures, so you were interested about. So those are things that we take for granted. Invisible structures usually are things we take for granted. Sometimes the elephants in the room that we don't address, we don't recognize, we don't acknowledge. Sometimes the relationships we don't honor properly. Sometimes the spaces that we're in, because I think spaces also hold like spirit and life and intelligence that lend to whatever activity is taking place there. Right? So I really want to hear you on this contextualizing and the importance of it.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it's important, because I had the opportunity to work in the US for 3 years. And one of the first things that I was exposed to when I got there was a cultural assimilation program. Right? So every expat, once you come from a different culture, you have to go through this cultural assimilation. And in that program, they had doctor of history, a doctor of geography, right, and an ex-psychologist, right, that administered the program. And one of the things that really stuck out to me, he said, Brent, in the US, there are 2 watershed moments in US history. One was the Civil War, right, and the other one was the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s. And then she went in to explain, right, how the North and the South got divided. The South was very rich, right, because they had all the crops and all the export, etc. And then when slavery was abolished, all of that went, right? And then things just moved to the industrialization of the North. And then that started the whole sharecroppers side of it, and then the Civil Rights Movement. And although slavery was abolished, it never really went away. Right? There were certain systems and so on that put in place.
Found different ways.
Correct. Right? So when the rioting started to happen, right, my son kind of said, well, Dad, there was riots. I said, before you condemn the rioting, because you and I wouldn't do that. Right? But lend some understanding to the mindset that potentially exists that would foster.
What drives you to
yes,
that?
correct.
Yeah.
So, learn, read, right? Understand what happened in the civil rights era, right? And I've kind of recommended certain books and so on for him to look at, because it's important to have that context before you just, you know, cast a stone.
So you can have a sort of informed
opinion
on the discussion.
Absolutely.
I want to jump off of what Brent just said, because I think starting with the history, and Nicole, to your point as well, there's a context you get from history, and you may even see your ancestors, your own family line in that history. But understanding that, as you rightly said, you can't live looking in the rearview mirror. You have to say, okay, what am I going to do in my time, in my generation,
how am I going to change?
with the agency that I have and the power that I have to make a change. And so even in my home, what my son and I started to do, we started looking at some of Malcolm X's speeches around the 1960s and Martin Luther King, and he started to get a perspective of both men. Now he's a calm, cool, collected kind of guy. So guess who he was drawn to? Martin. He's drawn to Dr. King because he said, I love his approach. I like the idea that love conquered all for him. He, you know, because we know it, love begets love, hate breeds hate.
Exactly.
And Dr. King said that, you know, he never saw hate solve anything yet in his life. And when you see riots happening, it's because it's really the voice of the unheard. People have just had enough and they reach a breaking point. So again, talking about context, it's really important for the children to understand that these things, the system isn't broken, it was built that way. Because we talk about this broken system and trying to fix it. It was built that way.
It was designed to do certain things.
Exactly. And that's why for black entrepreneurs, it's harder for them. And not just black entrepreneurs, but let me go one layer down. For female black entrepreneurs, it's harder to access capital to start a business. They struggle even more. Yet in the US, they are opening more businesses and more startups than anybody else. Because they're taking control of their destiny and saying, look, I don't have to be an employee. I don't have to work for Fortune 500 in order to have a life that is fulfilling and create something I could pass on to the next generation. It doesn't just have to be a 401k, as you call it, which is a pension fund. So that history and that context, I think, are really important. But we do have to bring it to our time and say, okay, so what are you going to do? And for some people, it may be showing up on the front line. There was a protest by the US Embassy. Some people show up in the streets. But for some people, it could be a conversation you have with your son, with your daughter. That's equally powerful.
And with their peers as well.
That's equally powerful. And I tell my son and my wife as well, you know, I said for me, like when I think of legacy a lot, and I think of death because of the number of deaths I've experienced in my family, my father, my mother, my brother. And so I'm always thinking about the end, which is a sort of morbid thing, but it also makes me do things I ordinarily wouldn't have done because I know that the end could come anytime. And I tell my son, you know, my legacy for you is what I want to leave in you, not for you. And I think that he understands that, look, all the trappings we have, if that goes, who you are, it's based on your values, your perspective, and what you stand for. Because if you don't stand for anything, you stand for nothing. So, Brent, I applaud you for letting your son be exposed to so many different sources.
I think it's important. He went to protest.
He did?
He went to protest. And I asked him about it. I said, well, how was that? And he said, that actually, it was a great experience. Right? He said the little fracas that kind of occurred and stuff, he didn't necessarily agree with it. Right? I kind of support that. You know? But yeah, he had an experience. You know? There was a cause. He thought it was a worthwhile cause.
He showed up.
Right? And you know, I want to show up and be part of something that is big
and be involved.
You know, so I felt good. I felt good, you know, because we can't just stand idly by. Even in our workplace, we need to have those conversations.
I believe in that.
Right? We need to have those conversations. We can't let those conversations just pass idly by.
Those large elephants that stay in the room for a long time.
You know what he asked me? He said, Dad, is there racism in Trinidad?
Did you ask him if he thinks there's racism in Trinidad?
He said, personally, I have not experienced it. I said, son, there is. There is. Right? But it's important for us to be able to identify it when it happens and do not be a passenger. Intervene.
So that's relating to this issue of spectatorship. And a lot of times we spectate our lives Sometimes we do it in our own bodies because we can't deal with situations. We don't have the skills to deal with situations. You talk about agency, and I saw your son acting out agency.
Yeah,
and
for
it's
sure.
because you have to have those conversations with them about themselves. Like I try to have that conversation with my son about himself. Like I ask him a lot of questions because I want to know what types of decisions he's going to make. And I want to know, okay, well, why you feel that way, or why you think that is going to be the solution, or you're preparing. If you have an intention to go do something, how are you preparing to get this activity or accomplish this goal? Are you considering things? So like his safety would have been something he might have considered. So he might have gone with a group as opposed to just going out alone by himself. So as simple as that is, that's a decision that he made, but he might not have made it consciously. So it's about bringing back the discussions we having with our children today. It's about bringing back to that place where you have to have an awareness of a lot of things. And sometimes it might seem a very complex, dynamic kind of way to have a child think, but they are our biggest creators. They are extremely creative, extremely explorative, but we snuff it. We kind of, we grow out of that part of ourselves. And that's the part of ourselves that we end up fighting to get a job that is going to pay us to design and be engineers and all of that.
So but how do we, not to cut you, because I want you to continue, but how do we help, how can we help people have conversations? Because sometimes I feel as if the conversations are not happening, and those same things that you have that in the home. So there's a transactional thing that happens in the home. You get up in the morning, get ready for school, you do this, you go to lessons, and you have a transactional day with your child, and it's all transaction. At what point do you have conversation? How can you have conversation?
That is something you have to develop, that culture in your home. You have to have that about yourself. So a lot of things, design and again, creativity again, we have that power and that ability to create cultures and subcultures. We do it all the time. I'm sure we probably would have made one already by just the way we having this conversation this afternoon. So is creating the space, making the time for it, and even just the head space alone, literally bringing down the amount of things we want to accomplish for the day to just a few activities that make us feel we still have a successful day. So cutting down the long grocery list to just one to three top things. Focus is very important.
So if you deliberately make time for that conversation, that's what you're saying?
Well, I designed my life like that. A lot of sacrifice because I have left the traditional world of work, which humbled me in terms of the relationships that I have. It showed me who are who and how I can lean on people for support and put aside my pride. How I can take more responsibility and be more participative in my life. So I'm not going to make it sound like if it's a bed of roses or anything, but it was a conscious decision, and I know that I have to show up in my life. I cannot go on autopilot, which is that transactional way of living. I can't depend on autopilot because I want to be more connected with myself and what's going on around me and have meaningful relationships. So I had to design my life to suit, to even have the space and all those things.
And how did your son engage with that, with those changes that you were making?
He's a regular child. He goes to school. So when I told him, I say, Leal, I'm going to this thing today. And the question that we have to answer is, how are you discussing today's events with your children? So he had, your battering, we're doing battering, and we plant exchange, and we planting outside. We drinking bush tea. The time I go into bed, or the time I waking up. That's what he has on his mind. But if you see my list compared to his list, I told him there's like those games that people play on game shows where to see how good you know your partner. So I had to compare his list to mine, and he had 4 items on his list, and I had about 20. So he will go through what he has to go through to filter everything coming at him, and that's why I say children are really resilient. And at some later point, I know the lessons that he needs, they will come to the fore when he needs them. I have to relinquish my own fears and trust that natural process, but just know that in my responsibility as a parent, I would have engaged him on these series of things and then leave it.
Nicole,
Brent, is it? Sorry,
no.
I was just going to ask if it's easier to talk to your sons than your daughter, for you.
No. She's very inquisitive. You know, she's very inquisitive.
I like her already.
No. And I actually bought a book for her some years ago. Be Inquisitive. It was the title of the book. And she's very much that. And I guess it's just my middle son is very quiet, right? He's very reserved, and he's doing CSEC exams now, so he's immersed in that, right? So he's socially distant anyway.
He's not coming up for air another while. Yeah.
So you know, it's a little difficult to have a conversation. So I actually use every management skill that I learned to try and evoke some sort of sentence or response from him. You know,
not now, Dad. Not now.
But the youngest, right? Very precocious. You know.
This is the 10.
That's 13.
13.
13 years old. So very precocious, very aware of what is happening in the world. And he asked a question, and I'd love to hear the answers that you would provide. He said, Daddy, how would racism stop? How would that stop?
How would that stop? With love.
I think
so you're just going to say, everybody love each other? And
I think we need to, I would add to the love. I would add that we need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. We need to be comfortable with being challenged, even though it's extremely uncomfortable. We need to sit down in the midst of being challenged. And you see that self-interrogation, interrogating yourself, that is not an easy journey for a lot of people. It's really, really difficult. And some of us, we really need somebody to sit with us through that and not judge us. So the ones that we think are the problems or who have all the fears that they push forward in different ways onto the rest of society, we need to challenge them, and they also need to be comfortable with being challenged. But to get to that place, we need people, mediators, who would handle, it's a delicate situation, who can handle that, but we need people to want to.
Apphia, I actually think to the question about how to stop racism, you gave part of the answer, which is to not be a spectator when you see injustice happening. When I looked at that George Floyd video, you know, that was one of the most hurtful things in it. And even though I knew what the outcome was, there was something in me as I was looking at the video, I was almost speaking to myself and trying to will every officer who was standing by
to do something.
And I mean, I knew how it was going to end.
And
I'm thinking, do something. And as that spectator culture, when you think, that doesn't involve me, that's not my business, or that's my friend doing that, I don't need to take a position. But things change when you speak truth to injustice, when you speak truth to power. And they have to stand up, because silence is opposition as well.
It is.
And so one of the ways I think, coming away from that spectator culture and taking action when you need to, even if you're not directly involved, that's one part of it. But in the home, I think as well, for parents to just speak more with their children, not speak to them, because we're always telling them what to do. But how many times do we say, let me tell you about a time when Daddy did something really left field or really stupid and dumb, and let me tell you what I learned from that. Because that's how you get to influence the mindset and help them to see the world through your eyes as well. And for me, I had one of those incidents in Queen's Royal College. It was around the early 2000s when QRC was allowing girls to come in to do sixth form. And this one girl, very dark, and I remember the guys were calling her Blackie and you're like tan, and this girl is almost at the point of tears. And none of my friends said anything. And I was in shock, and eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I shouted out from the back of the class, you know, what is this? If that was your brother, that was your sister, your mother, somebody who you cared for? Would you allow that person, would you allow those fellas to speak like that to her? And I remember that day I lost a lot of friends. A lot of the guys just pulled away from me because they thought I was trying to, you know, sort of gain favor with the girls and win them over. And a lot of the girls also respected me for standing up to them. And to this day, I'll tell you how far those things go when you stand up when you need to, even if you're not directly involved. One of the girls was looking on years later at Hyatt. She became the first female keynote speaker at Curiosity's graduation. Wow. And she mentioned, she said, there was a day back in when I was in Form 6, and she relayed.
She talked about it.
She talked about the incident, and she said that day, I had hope in men again. I had hope that they were wearing men again. I had no idea that me standing up here, so you're getting, it's called truth bombs, not goosebumps, truth bombs. I had no idea that me standing up for something that I had no business with, that it would have such an effect on a young woman's life. And that years later, she would then take that wisdom and impart it to a next generation of Curiosity students. And that's how the change happens. That's how it happens. Do something when you need to. Don't be silent, but then keep sharing the stories. Because that's how history gets lost.
Yes,
it is.
When you start to rely on the television and device and you stop talking and saying, hey, let me tell you what's happening in our family. History gets lost and the lessons get lost on the children as well.
So and this is, I guess this is our last word, so I'll just ask each of you to go around the table. What are you doing next with your child?
I am lobbying right now for him to get to stay home a little longer. he's about to return to school because he has to do SEA, and we know the date for SEA and then tutor's response, the teacher's response. We're not quite sure right now. But I think he's pretty okay, so I'm just lobbying for him to get like a little
Spend more time at home.
Just a little week again for us to just be in chill mode before we become a little more structured in terms of preparing for the exam.
I like that. Life is not just an exam. Brent, what are you doing with your kids?
The events have been very instructive, you know, and I realize that a lot of people they don't have the history. Right, so for the kids, I want to encourage them to and help them with material as much as I can, right? For them to get, all right, so they have the what occurred in the US, but there's a very local, we have a nice little cocktail of prejudice here. You know, there's class prejudice, you know, there's racial prejudice as well, right? Understand how all the races came into Trinidad, and understand, you know, how certain names have a lot of weight in the country, right? And others don't.
And where did that come from?
Exactly. Right. So, do some reading, get some history, right? And understand. Have context. Become an independent thinker. Make your own decisions. Intervene.
Floyd, what do you do?
Yeah, for me, it's a combination of letting them stay informed, keep speaking with them, keep sharing my experiences, but also letting them be wary of what their sources of information sources are. Because you don't read the news and you're uninformed. And if you read too much of it, you could be misinformed. So you have to be so careful. So I'm kind of letting them start to pick sense from nonsense and so, okay, what sources can I trust for the truth and for partiality? So, and for being impartial, sorry. But to balance that, I think one of the things that during this period that my family and I discovered was what I like to say is a next normal, because looking back on it, normal wasn't quite working for us. We didn't have enough moments of joy and of conversation and of just relaxation.
Exactly.
So we have things like family movie nights now. It's every Friday we have a date, dinner and then a movie. We exercise together. So all of those routines that I think brought life back to home and to living at home, I want to keep those routines going because they don't have to be lost the more things go back when we move into this next normal.
You realize that COVID made the home the center of everything now?
Yeah.
When it was Movie Town and it was Arpita Avenue and it was wherever else, the home is now the center.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Home has always been the nucleus of society. We just kind of...
We kind of forgot.
Yeah,
but there's so many distractions now, though.
Yeah.
There's so much iPad and games and
everything.
But sometimes it's the leadership in the home as well. You have to remind your children that, you're working this hard to then have moments like these. Simple moments of joy and pleasure and feeling like, we're not just existing while living, I think it's a reminder that that's what all the sacrifice and hard work,
yeah.
you know, that's what everything is for.
So I get more than the eye. I get the eye, I get hands up, I get the paper, the only thing I get is the hook to drag my tail over the chair. So guys, thank you very much. I had a great time having this conversation because I did it on so long, but it was fun. Thank you very much.